we say we're preserving due process because we said we preserve due process. We're the Armed Attorneys. Today we're talking about the new red flag provisions that came out of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, also known as Senate Bill 2938. This has been signed into law by President Joe Biden, June the 25th, 2022. This is the law of the land, but let's talk about the red flag laws related to this. This is section 12003. That's what we're talking about. But before we begin, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button and consider becoming a channel member if you enjoy this content. Now, what does this section of the law do? It adds a kind of an incentive, a grant program for states to implement red flag laws. Now, they implemented this in an existing grant program scheme that is related to criminal justice reforms. And we have this current grant scheme, and it grants, money for all types of things like law enforcement programs, prosecution and court programs, prevention and education program, corrections and community corrections programs, drug treatment and enforcement programs, planning, evaluation, and technology improvement programs, crime victim and witness programs, mental health programs related to law enforcement and corrections programs, including behavioral programs and crisis intervention teams. Now, what the new red flag provision of this law does is it creates a new subsection for grants related to what, Edwin?
Yes, these criminal justice grants, it relates to the implementation of state crisis intervention court proceedings and related programs, which include, but are not limited to, mental health courts, drug courts, and veterans courts. And most states already have those courts set up.
Yep.
Well, what's different, what most states don't have, is the addition of providing for an extreme risk protection order program. And now what's interesting is that they didn't just say extreme risk protection order program. They did lay a parameter of what it at minimum has to address in the protection of due process.
And those are, they want certain requirements met for pre-deprivation and post-deprivation of, when we say pre and post-deprivation, we're talking about taking someone's property, their firearms in these cases. There needs to be notice provisions, right to be represented by counsel, being able to cross-examine your witnesses, confront your witnesses, and have an unbiased magistrate. Now, there's more due process provisions in this, but they lay out, hey, we need to have some semblance of due process, and a lot of times we see the Congress write stuff in there so that when these cases go up and are challenged in the courts, they say, look, we say we're preserving due process because we said we preserve due process. And so that might be a little bit of about those provisions, but they do lay out some protections theoretically.
Yes. What's interesting is that these are specific to pre-deprivation due process rights, in which pre-deprivation means this is before they take your guns. So presumably this means that a red flag program would have to have some sort of notice, some sort of adversarial proceeding prior to taking the firearms, which of course runs counter to what all the anti-gun folks have been saying, is that they want the ability to get an ex parte protective order, an ex parte red flag extreme risk protective order, in which ex parte means that the person who's having their firearms taken does not participate in the process. So how do you think that's going to work?
Well, I'm going to be interested to see how it works, and maybe even some of these red flag laws that exist already and that are out there and being utilized don't meet the due process requirements that are required underneath this grant program. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But I do think that if there is a notice provision where you have an opportunity to confront your witnesses and have an attorney, you're still going to be put at expense. Attorneys aren't free, and so we see that this is an infringement on the Second Amendment rights, and essentially it discourages people from being gun owners. And we all know, red flag laws don't really stop criminals because they focus, it seems like, on guns instead of the dangerous individual. But we'll see how this plays out. Now, I will say the good news out of this. Now, we know that, and we're starting at the position that all gun laws are infringements on the Second Amendment and should be opposed. But compared to, what we saw pass out of the House under House 7910, I think that's what it was. This is a huge improvement over what passed out of the House and is currently sitting in the Senate. And I think that's probably going to die there. But what is good about this program, and I put good in quotes, is that it is a carrot program or an incentive for states to adopt, as opposed to, a stick. It's not a general revenue sharing program where they say, hey, we're going to withhold all your criminal justice funds unless you adopt a red flag law, which is kind of what we saw in the other bill.
Yeah, in other words, they could have done this two ways. They could have said, "Look, we have money for you if you do this," or they could have said, "We're going to take money from you or keep you from getting money unless you do this." And fortunately, in this compromise bill, it definitely went with the former, whereas House Resolution 7910 went with the latter.
Yeah, and another, bad provision out of this. Unlike other sections, there's no sunset provision for this red flag provision, and we do see that there is an opportunity for the government to expand this and turn it into a stick, like Edwin was talking about, where it is compulsory. You need to adopt this, or we're going to withhold funds, as opposed to maybe just an incentive to adopt a red flag. But I anticipate in a lot of states that we see that are gun friendly, that oppose red flag measures, they're going to continue to oppose those. They're not going to apply for these grant programs, or if they do, they're going to be applying under one of these different subsections for the Veterans Treatment Court or the Drug Court, or maybe not taking advantage of the red flag extreme risk protective orders. But we hope you enjoyed this breakdown of section 12003 of the red flag provision of this new Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. We're doing a breakdown of all of these sections. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss those breakdowns. But if you have any questions or comments, make sure to leave those in the section down below. And until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.